You are an old woman from a town nobody powerful was ever born in. And tomorrow morning, the richest kings in the known world will travel for weeks, slaughter their best livestock, and hand over a small fortune just to hear what you mumble from a stool. You have no army, no crown, and not one drop of royal blood. What you do have is a three-legged seat, a cave full of sweet-smelling air, and the absolute conviction of an entire civilization that when you open your mouth, a god is doing the talking. You weren't born special. Let's clear up the job requirements, because they are not what you'd expect. You did not become the Oracle of Delphi by being a princess. Delphi did not care who your father was. You could be the daughter of a farmer, a fisherman, or a man whose entire career was shoveling goat manure, and you could still grow up to be the single most consulted woman on the planet. The rules were simple. You had to be from Delphi. You had to live a sober and respectable life, and you had to be willing to give up sex indefinitely. That last part was the deal breaker, because the whole system ran on the belief that the god Apollo was, in a spiritual sense, your one and only companion. The Greeks were famously fuzzy on exactly how spiritual that was. And no, you did not have to be a lifelong virgin to qualify. Plenty of scholars think you could have been married, raised children, buried a husband, and only then taken up the role and the vow that came with it. The point was never your past. It was that once you put on the robes, you belonged to Apollo and nobody else. In a world obsessed with bloodlines and inheritance, your power came from the exact opposite of all that. You gave everything up, and in return you got to tell emperors what to do. In the beginning, they wanted the Pythia young and virginal. Then came the scandal that changed everything. According to the historian Diodorus Siculus, a man from Thessaly named Socrates showed up, became obsessed with a beautiful young Pythia, and assaulted her. The Delphians responded with a new policy. From then on, the oracle had to be a woman over 50. But here is the detail that breaks your brain. They still dressed her in the costume of a young maiden. So your standard work uniform, as a woman past 50, was the outfit of a teenage bride, because the symbolism of youthful purity mattered more to everyone than the actual woman wearing it. This was ancient Greek religion, where the symbolism was always doing the heavy lifting, and you would not be working alone. During the boom years, when half the Mediterranean wanted answers, Delphi kept as many as 3 women in the role at once. 2 would take turns on the sacred stool, and a third stayed on standby in case one of them tapped out. Being the voice of a god, it turns out, was demanding enough to need a substitute on the bench, the navel of the world. Your workplace had the single best address in Greek mythology. Delphi clung to the slopes of Mount Parnassus, and the Greeks didn't just think it was beautiful, they thought it was the exact center of the earth. The myth says Zeus released 2 eagles from opposite ends of the world and let them fly toward each other to find the middle. They met directly above Delphi, and the spot was marked with a carved stone called the omphalos, which literally means navel. Your office was, by official mythological decree, the belly button of the universe. The sanctuary around you was a walled complex, roughly 190 meters long, packed with treasuries, statues, a theater, and a winding sacred way leading up to the Temple of Apollo. Cities competed to build the most impressive little treasury building here, which was basically ancient product placement, a flashy way to show off your wealth and stay on the god's good side. The temple itself burned down and got rebuilt more than once, because that is just what Greek temples did. The famous ruins you can still visit today went up in the 4th century BC, and the origin story behind your job title is genuinely brutal. Before Apollo owned Delphi, the site belonged to the earth goddess Gaia and was guarded by a giant serpent named Python. Apollo arrived, killed the monster with his arrows, and took the place over. That is where your name comes from. Pythia and Pythian both come from Python, and quite possibly from the Greek word meaning to rot, because the serpent's corpse was left to decay on the spot. You are, technically, named after a rotting dragon, a world-famous, deeply respected rotting dragon, but a rotting dragon all the same. There is an even weirder origin story for the place itself. One old tradition says Apollo needed priests for his shiny new shrine, so he spotted a ship of Cretan sailors out at sea, turned himself into a dolphin, and leapt aboard. He steered the terrified crew all the way to shore, revealed himself as a god, and informed them they now worked for him. That, supposedly, is where the name Delphi comes from, the Greek word for dolphin. And before any of that, the oracle had already passed through a couple of divine owners, from Gaia, the earth goddess, down to the goddess Themis, before Apollo muscled in and took over the family business for good. Apollo's victory was such a big deal that they threw a festival for it, the Pythian Games, held every 4 years and ranked second in prestige only to the Olympics. But Delphi added its own twist. While the Olympics were all about muscle, the Pythian Games started with contests of music and poetry. fitting for Apollo, the god of both. So your home turf basically invented the idea that the arts deserved a championship too. Apollo works part-time. You would assume that being the mouthpiece of a major god is a full-time, year-round commitment. It absolutely was not. You worked 1 day a month, a single day, the 7th, believed to be Apollo's birthday. For the other 29 or so days, the most famous oracle in the ancient world was simply closed for business. It gets stranger. You only worked 9 months out of 12. For the 3 winter months, the Greeks believed Apollo left town entirely to go live among the Hyperboreans, a mythical people way up in the frozen north. And while the boss was on his winter holiday, the god Dionysus, deity of wine and partying, moved in and ran the sanctuary in his place. So for a full quarter of every year, the holiest prophecy site in Greece was being managed by the god of getting wasted. Frankly, that explains a lot. Here is the detail nobody expects. The Greeks believed Dionysus was actually buried at Delphi, his tomb tucked right inside Apollo's own temple. So the most sober, rational prophecy center in the ancient world doubled as the grave of the god of wild abandon. Order and chaos, sharing one sacred address, taking turns running the place. It was history's most prestigious timeshare. So really do the math on your calendar. You worked roughly 9 days a year. The kings of Lydia, the generals of Athens, the lawmakers of Sparta, they all had to plan their biggest decisions around the work schedule of one part-time grandmother. If you missed your slot, you waited, sometimes for months, camping out in the sacred town, spending money the entire time, and praying the goat would be in a good mood. Which, yes, we need to talk about the goat. The goat decides. Before you said a single prophetic word, the day itself had to be approved. Not by a priest, not by a king, by a goat. The ritual went like this. They would take a goat and sprinkle it with cold water, and they would watch. If the goat shivered and trembled all over, the omen was good, Apollo was present, and the oracle was open. If the goat just stood there, dry and unbothered, the day was cancelled. No prophecy. Pack it up. The strategic future of an entire empire could come down to whether a single farm animal happened to feel a chill. And as you will find out shortly, ignoring that goat could get someone killed. Assuming the goat played along, you had your own preparations. You would fast, then head down to the Castalian spring to purify yourself in its cold mountain water. You would put on the ceremonial outfit, drink from the sacred Croesus spring, and take up a sprig of laurel, Apollo's plant. Some accounts say you chewed the bay leaves too, which has since launched 1,000 lazy theories that the laurel itself got you high. It almost certainly did not. Chewing bay leaves mostly just leaves you with a mouthful of bay leaves. Your customers, meanwhile, had a checklist of their own. They had to pay a fee called the Polanos, which started its life as a humble sacrificial cake and gradually turned into, basically, cash. The bigger and richer the client, the bigger the payment. Then they had to offer a sacrifice and wait their turn, unless they had promantia. That was the ancient VIP pass, the official right to jump the entire line and consult you before everybody else. Which cities got it? Mostly the ones who had donated generously to the sanctuary. So even when you were trying to get a message from the divine, money could still buy you a better place in line. Even the gods, it seems, kept a fast lane for the wealthy. Some things about humanity never change. Down into the smoke. Now for the part everyone remembers. When the moment finally came, you descended into the Adyton, the forbidden inner chamber underneath the temple floor. The word Adyton literally means do not enter, which tells you exactly how off-limits this space was to ordinary mortals. Down there, you took your seat on a tall bronze tripod, a 3-legged stool set directly over an opening in the rock. And out of that opening came the pneuma. Pneuma means breath, or vapor, and it was the active ingredient in the whole operation. The ancient writers described a sweet-smelling gas rising up from a crack in the earth, putting you into a trance, a state in which the god could enter you and speak through your mouth. Plutarch, who actually worked as a priest at Delphi and so knew the place from the inside, described the scent as sweet, the smell of expensive perfume. He also admitted, a little awkwardly for the family business, that in his own day the vapor had grown weak and unpredictable, which clearly worried him. The geographer Strabo described the same setup, a vapor drifting up from a small opening that threw whoever sat above it into a divine state of possession. Your visitor never got to talk to you directly, by the way. They handed their question to the priests, sometimes scratched onto a lead tablet, and the priests passed it along. You were not there to chat. You were there to be the channel, the open phone line between a desperate human and a god who answered, at his absolute best, in moody hints. So you would breathe it in, laurel in hand, perched on your tripod over a glowing crack in the world. You would begin to speak. Sometimes you answered a direct question, sometimes the words came in a rush. And the pilgrim in front of you, the one who had traveled for weeks, paid a fortune, and killed a perfectly healthy animal for the privilege, would lean in close to catch what the god was saying through the mouth of a peasant grandmother in a young girl's dress. And here is the wild part. It worked. For roughly 1,000 years, it kept working. High on the job. This is the question everyone really wants answered. So let's get into it. Were you breathing genuine mind-altering gas? Or was the whole thing an elaborate piece of theater? For most of the 20th century, scholars firmly said theater. When French archaeologists dug up Delphi around the year 1900, they went looking for the legendary chasm and its magical fumes. And they found absolutely nothing. No crack, no gas, no evidence at all. By 1950, the leading expert, a man named Pierre Amandri, declared the gas story a complete myth, pointing out that you don't get intoxicating fumes without volcanic activity, and Delphi sits nowhere near a volcano. Case closed, everyone agreed. Except it wasn't. In the 1990s, a geologist named Gilles Deboer joined forces with an archaeologist named John Hale and took a fresh look at the site. They discovered that not one but two fault lines cross directly beneath the temple. The rock down there is a bituminous limestone, which is loaded with petrochemicals. When those faults grind and heat the rock, they can release light hydrocarbon gases. The team even detected traces of one in particular, ethylene, in a nearby spring. Ethylene is sweet-smelling, exactly as Plutarch reported, and it was actually used as a medical anesthetic in the early 20th century, causing euphoria in small amounts and a wild, dangerous delirium in large ones. All of a sudden, the trance had a real chemistry behind it. It is a brilliant theory. It is also very far from settled. Critics, including the historian Darren LaHoo, argue that the gas levels found at the site were far too low to actually intoxicate anyone and that you simply cannot run a 1,000-year religious institution on a faint whiff of fumes. So, were you, the Pythia, genuinely high on the job? The honest answer is that nobody knows for sure, and the experts are still going at it. What we do know is that you believed it, the kings believed it, and belief turned out to be the most powerful drug in the entire building. And belief, unlike any gas, never thinned out or drifted away on a bad day. The goat was right. Remember that shivering goat, the one that decided whether the oracle opened at all? Here is the story of why nobody dared to overrule it. Plutarch records a day when the signs were clearly bad. The goat refused to cooperate, which meant Apollo wanted the day off. But an important delegation had already arrived, and the priests, not wanting to turn away high-paying VIPs, pressured the Pythia to go down and prophesy anyway. Against the ritual, against the goat, it went catastrophically wrong. Instead of slipping into her usual calm trance, the Pythia came back broken. Her voice turned harsh and groaning. She thrashed about wildly, and she filled the chamber with a horrible, inhuman shriek before bolting for the exit and collapsing. Everyone present, priests and visitors alike, fled the room in terror. Within a few days, she was dead. The gas theorists adore this story because it has all the hallmarks of poisoning. A normal dose producing a trance, an overdose producing a corpse. But honestly, you don't need any chemistry to get the lesson. The system had a safety check. The goat was that safety check. And the one recorded time human greed overrode the goat, the oracle died for it. So the rule for you is simple. When the priests admit the omens are bad and suggest you skip the day, you skip the day. A great empire will fall. Now let's talk about your greatest hits. Because as the Pythia, you delivered some of the most quoted lines in all of human history. And your most legendary client was King Croesus of Lydia, a man so staggeringly rich that the Greeks turned his name into a synonym for wealth itself. Before he trusted you with anything important, Croesus decided to test every famous oracle on Earth. He sent messengers out with orders to ask, on one specific predetermined day, what the king was doing at that precise moment. Back home, Croesus made sure to do the single weirdest thing he could invent. He chopped up a tortoise and a lamb and boiled them together in a bronze pot with a bronze lid. According to Herodotus, only Delphi got it right. Your reply opened with a flourish, announcing that you knew the number of the grains of sand and the measure of the sea, that you understood the mute and heard the silent. Then, almost casually, it described the smell of a hard-shelled tortoise simmering in bronze alongside lamb. Croesus was instantly convinced you were the real deal, so he returned with the question that actually mattered. Should he go to war against the rising power of Persia? Your answer. If Croesus attacks, he will destroy a great empire. Wonderful, thought Croesus, and he marched off to fight the Persians. He lost, completely. The great empire he ended up destroying was, of course, his own. When he furiously sent word back to complain, The oracle essentially shrugged and pointed out that he really should have asked which empire, and this is your signature move in a nutshell. You are never wrong. You are simply, occasionally, misunderstood by people who didn't bother to read the fine print. Wooden walls and wisdom. Croesus was no fluke. Your prophecies kept turning up at the absolute biggest turning points in history. In 480 BC, the Persian king Xerxes came thundering toward Greece with a colossal army, and the panicking Athenians rushed to you for guidance. The first answer you gave was pure nightmare fuel, telling them to flee to the ends of the earth, that their city was doomed, that fire and war would leave nothing standing. The Athenian envoys were so shattered they flat out refused to accept it and begged for a second opinion, which, against all the usual rules, you actually gave them. Your second answer told them that everything would fall, but that a wooden wall would keep them safe, and it spoke of a divine Salamis that would bring death to the sons of women. Reassuring, right? The Athenians argued furiously about what it meant. Some were convinced the wooden wall meant the old thorn fence around the Acropolis, but a sharp politician named Themistocles insisted it meant their navy, their fleet of wooden ships, and that calling Salamis divine, rather than hateful, meant the enemy would die there, not them. Athens gambled everything on his interpretation, abandoned their own city, and went on to crush the Persian fleet at the Battle of Salamis. One of the most decisive victories in Western history came down to how you read a single metaphor. You weren't just for kings and generals either. When a friend of the philosopher Socrates asked you whether any man alive was wiser than Socrates, you answered that no one was. Socrates, who loudly insisted that he knew nothing, spent the rest of his life chewing on what you meant, and finally decided the point was that real wisdom is understanding how little you actually know. Carved above the entrance to your own temple were two short phrases that summed up the entire Greek philosophy of life. Know thyself and nothing in excess. 2,500 years later, people still get those words tattooed on their bodies. You were handing out timeless life advice before it was even remotely cool. Even the Spartan lawgiver Lycurgus came to consult you, and the legend says you greeted him by wondering aloud whether to call him a man or a god, then helped lay the groundwork for Sparta's entire constitution. Not bad for a part-time job. Neither speaks nor conceals. Time to demolish a myth about yourself, because pop culture has genuinely done you wrong. The picture most people carry around is of the oracle as a woman foaming at the mouth, eyes rolled back, screeching pure gibberish, while a circle of scheming priests translates the nonsense into clever poems. It makes for a fantastic movie scene. It is also mostly invented. A lot of that lurid image comes from much later writers, some of them poets reaching for drama, others Christian critics determined to make pagan religion look absurd. It also got hopelessly tangled up with a separate prophetess called the Sibyl, who genuinely was described as wild and raving. Heraclitus, writing around the same era, described that Sibyl with her raving mouth, uttering grim, joyless, unadorned things, her voice somehow carrying across 1,000 years through the god inside her. Gorgeous line. Completely different woman. But the actual recorded answers from Delphi, and historians have cataloged hundreds of them, are frequently clear, coherent, and even kind of boring. Loads of ordinary people came to you with practical questions. Should we plant a colony over here? Should I marry this particular person? Is now a good time to make the deal? And you gave plenty of plain, useful answers. Did the priests sometimes help polish your responses into proper verse? Maybe. That part is honestly still debated by scholars. But the popular idea that you were just a babbling vessel while the men did all the real intellectual work is pretty thin. Plenty of answers are recorded as your own words. The philosopher Heraclitus put it perfectly around 500 BC, describing how the Lord of Delphi neither speaks nor conceals, but gives a sign. That right there was the genius of the whole operation. You didn't give commands. You gave riddles that people had to solve for themselves, which meant that when things went well, Apollo got the credit, and when they went badly, the blame landed squarely on whoever interpreted you wrong. It is a strategy you ran on the powerful again and again. King Philip of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, reportedly got a prophecy about a wreathed bull ready for sacrifice. He happily decided the doomed bull meant Persia, lined up for slaughter. It turned out the garlanded victim was Philip himself, assassinated soon after. And the Emperor Nero was supposedly warned to beware the number 73. He assumed it meant he'd comfortably live to 73. Instead, a 73-year-old general named Galba led the revolt that toppled him. Every single time, the words were true. People just heard what they wanted to hear. Closing time. So how does it all end? Your career as the living voice of a god. Slowly, and then all at once. By the time Plutarch was writing in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, the oracle was already in decline. He sat down and wrote an entire essay trying to work out why the oracles of Greece were going silent, why the sacred vapor had weakened, why fewer and fewer pilgrims were making the trip. He called it On the Obsolescence of Oracles, which is about the most depressing title a man can give to a report on his own employer. His best guess was that the gods were quietly withdrawing from the world, that the age of speaking to them face to face was simply running out. The Roman world was shifting under everyone's feet. New religions were spreading fast, and a peasant woman breathing fumes on a mountainside seemed less a prophet than a holdover from an older age. Then, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, and the old pagan oracles went from charming to outright illegal. Around 393 AD, the Emperor Theodosius shut the entire operation down for good. There is a famous, haunting line that tradition remembers as the very last prophecy ever spoken at Delphi, supposedly given to an envoy of the Emperor Julian, who had tried and failed to bring the old gods back. Scholars seriously doubt it is authentic, but it is far too perfect to leave out. The oracle's final message was this: "Tell the king the fair wrought hall has fallen to the ground. Apollo no longer has his house, nor his prophetic laurel, nor the spring that speaks. The talking water has dried up. After more than 1,000 years, the navel of the world fell silent. The kings stopped coming. The goat finally got every day off." And somewhere on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, an old woman in a young girl's dress climbed down off her tripod for the very last time, and nobody bothered to write down her name.